Good afternoon and welcome to our live audience here at the Chapel of St. Joseph at St. Joseph's University, as well as those who may be joining us through the live streaming and posted on our YouTube page in campus ministry here at St. Joseph's University. My name is Father Dan Joyce. I'm the Executive Director of Mission Programs, and we have a special presentation today as part of our Mission Week activities. Father Douglas Ray will be offering us an introduction to those dimensions of the what are called the Universal Apostolic Preferences of the Society of Jesus. Father Ray is a campus minister here at St. Joseph's University. Previously, he had been on the staff of St. Raphael's Parish in Raleigh, North Carolina, and before that had been in studies as a Jesuit and also previously working at Fairfield University. Born more or less in the Bronx and raised in Manhattan. He's a true child of Gotham, as we would say, but he's here in Philadelphia and working with our students and our faculty and staff. So without further ado, Father Ray, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Father Joyce for inviting me to do this, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. Our topic today is the Universal Apostolic Preferences of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit Mission for this decade. Now, this is a topic that I suspect most of you don't know all that much about. I mean, the term Universal Apostolic Preferences doesn't really trip off the tongue easily. And so I thought it might be useful, before we go into any level of detail, just to give a little bit of background on the Universal Apostolic Preferences, or the UAPs, as we sometimes call them, to make it a little easier to say and to write. And so, first off, what are these things? Well, they are, at their heart, four ideas that are supposed to provide focus for what Jesuits around the world are doing in the coming decade. And so they are showing the way to God. In other words, helping people come into contact with God through the spiritual exercises, through discernment, through Ignatian tools to help people know God better and incorporate that into the heart of their lives. The second is walking with the excluded, going to those who are on the margins, bringing a mission of reconciliation and healing. The third is accompanying young people in the creation of a hope-filled future. Now, you can tell from the title of that one that these were not created by a marketing department, because no marketing department would have had three that are this long and one that's that long. But the idea, of course, is to accompany youth, to journey with them, to help them become who God has created them to be, and to prepare them to take over the world for the next generation. And the fourth of these UAPs is caring for our common home, a concern for the environment, for the one planet that we all share. Now, we're going to go into some detail on all of these, but before we do, I thought it might be useful to have a little bit of background. Where did these things come from? And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to explain where these things came from, and I realized you need a little bit of background on who we are as Jesuits. Now, Jesuits usually are out in the world, as we say, working in the vineyard of the Lord. We're all over the world, we're on every continent, and most of the time, we're very busy doing our work. And so we leave things up to the Superior General in Rome to make sort of the big picture decisions. But every once in a while, when there's a question that needs to be decided, if we need to elect a new Superior General, or if it's just a moment in time where we feel that we need to address big questions, we'll have what's known as a General Congregation. And so back in 2008, we had our 35th General Congregation, which set a series of apostolic preferences for the coming decade. And a General Congregation gathers Jesuits from all over the world for a meeting, briefly, usually for a few weeks in Rome. And then once it's gone, it's up to Father General to implement whatever it is the General Congregation has decided to do. And for some reason, GC 35 decided to be very specific in one area. It came up with these Universal Apostolic Preferences that it termed to be Africa, China, the Roman houses. Those are seminaries and academic institutions in Rome that serve the entire Universal Church, like the Gregorian University or the Pontificum Biblicum. Then there was migrants and refugees, and the intellectual apostolate. working in universities, doing academic research. Now, one thing about these is that each of them is very specific, and they don't have very much to do with each other. You know, China and Africa are geographic areas. The Roman houses and the intellectual apostolate are both academically oriented. Migrants and refugees doesn't seem to have much to do with any of the other four. And so this raised a question for a lot of Jesuits. Well, how does this affect me if I don't actually work in any of those areas? For example, if you're working at St. Joseph's University, okay, great, you're working in the intellectual apostolate. But what does that have to do with China or Africa? Or if you're working at a retreat house in Missouri, what does that have to do with any of these? And so after about a decade, there started to be a concern among some Jesuits that we needed to look to the signs of the times. We need to pay attention to what the needs of the society and the church are at this particular moment. And so at the next general congregation, they said, we think we need to renew what these preferences are. But this time, they had the good sense not to specify them just on a couple of weeks' time. They left it up to the Father General, to the Superior General, the newly elected Father Sosa, to choose what he thought would be the best for the entire society around the world. And so what he did was he started a process of asking people. Jesuits all over the world were asked to sit in their communities, to pray, to reflect, to talk with each other about what they were seeing as the needs of the society at this particular moment in time. Kind of like the synod that Pope Francis has going on around the world right now, listening to people, but just for the particular needs of this one tiny piece of the church, the Society of Jesus. And so over the course of a couple of years, people gathered in our own individual communities. And then we sent those reflections up to our provinces, up to the 6 conferences that Jesuits are organized into worldwide, and eventually to Father Sosa in Rome, who sort of distilled what he was hearing and proposed these 4 particular universal apostolic preferences. Then he brought those to Pope Francis for his input, his reflection, and then Pope Francis gave those to us actually as a mission. Now, many Jesuits who have final vows take a 4th vow of obedience to the Pope in missions. And so in many senses, this is a mission that has been given to the entire society by the Pope to serve the universal church in this particular way. And so that, in a very large nutshell, is where these things came from. Different question is, okay, well, that's where they came from. Why do we have them? Why do we need them? Well, the Society of Jesus and all of the works with which we're affiliated and those we sponsor are a very unusual network. For the Jesuits ourselves, there are over 16,000 of us scattered around the world. We come from 112 different countries. We operate in 80 different provinces. But we are one single society. And if we're really going to function as a single Society of Jesus, we need to have something to focus our work. Certainly, we have our vows, we have Father General in Rome, but most of the decisions that are made by Jesuits on a day-to-day basis are made on the ground. And so the Universal Apostolic Preferences are intended to be a focus to allow us, as we're working, to decide where to put our energies. And part of the reason that this is important is because the society is at a moment of transition. In the 20th century, the society was mostly a European and North American institution. These days, it's a society where 2/3 of the Jesuits in formation around the world are either in Africa or South Asia. Where we work is going to be very different in the future than where it was in the past. The kind of work we're going to be doing, the kind of questions we're going to be asking. And so we need to focus on what the needs of the church and the society are at this particular moment in time. Because we do all kinds of different works. Sure, here at St. Joe's, we're all familiar with the intellectual apostolate and education. We are a university, after all. There are 27 Jesuit universities in the United States and 193 Jesuit colleges and universities around the world. 827 Jesuit secondary and pre-secondary schools. That's a very large network. But education, while it may be what Jesuits are very well known for, is just one piece of what we do. We also work in retreat centers. We work as missionaries. The apostolic administrator for Kyrgyzstan is Father Corcoran, a Jesuit from the east coast of the United States, who's responsible for all the Jesuits, all the Catholics in the Central Asian state of Kyrgyzstan. We're missionaries, we work with refugees. We do so many different kinds of work that it would be impossible to have ourselves understand ourselves as having a single focus and mission without something to focus us. And so that is part of why we have the UAPs. Okay, so that's where they are, that's where they came from. Thought it might be useful to look at each of the UAPs in a little bit of detail, because each of them is unique, but they all interact with each other. Now, the first thing to understand about the Universal Apostolic Preferences is that they're preferences, not priorities. That was something Father Sosa was very, very clear on when he gave those to us. And about half the Jesuits in the world looked at that statement and went, huh? What does that mean? Well, the thing to remember is that this is not a strategic plan. This is not a statement like the prior ones where it said, okay, we're going to focus on China and Africa, which means we'll put fewer resources into the rest of the world. Lots of institutions have strategic plans where they say, we're going to prioritize this kind of work over another kind. That's what priorities do. Preferences, on the other hand, are intended to open us up. For the Jesuits and all of the people who work with us in all of our apostolates, the preferences are intended to be ways of focusing the question of what do we do in the particular work that we are doing in this apostolate? How can we discern the best thing to do in the areas where we already are? They should be guiding all of our apostolic works. They're not intended to say, okay, stop doing this kind of work and do that instead. They're intended really to speak to the conversion of our hearts, to open us up to where God is calling us and calling our works at this particular moment in time. So, the first of the preferences, showing the way to God. There are many different spiritual traditions in the Catholic Church. There's Ignatian spirituality that the Jesuits are known for and that so many other congregations use as well. There's Franciscan spirituality with its radical focus on poverty. There's Benedictine spirituality with its withdrawal to the desert. All of these lead to God, but Ignatian spirituality is the thing that has been entrusted to the Society of Jesus. We feel a particular duty to share the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius with the world from generation to generation, to make sure that it continues to be a living tradition that others can make use of as well, but we have a duty to steward. At our university, we often refer to Jesuit values, things like forming men and women with and for others, talking about cura personalis, the care for the whole person. These values are ones that guide what we do at the university every day. All of these are ultimately rooted in the spirituality of the spiritual exercises. And we think that they're very important to guiding what it is all of our Jesuit works do. And so the first of these preferences has to be deepening people's understanding of the spiritual exercises, helping them understand that the work that they're doing in these apostolates isn't just a job, isn't just another social service organization or another educational institution. It is doing work for the greater glory of God, to help people know God, love God, come to understand that they are loved by God, so that they can focus their work to bring people closer to God themselves. Now, one thing that Father Sosa said that was confusing to a few people was the idea that we should be offering a deeper alternative to secularism. You know, the Society of Jesus has been around for almost 500 years. We're celebrating the Ignatian year right now, the 500th anniversary of Ignatius's conversion. The world now looks very different than it did in his time. When he was a young man, the Protestant Reformation hadn't started yet. Western Christianity was a single thing, and everyone just understood the world in such a way that government and religion were intertwined. The world doesn't look like that anymore, but the Society of Jesus is still here. And we have to look at the world in which we live now and see the gifts and the opportunities that are being offered in a world that's growing more secular. There are a lot of things that have to be offered for this. And one of the things that Father Sosa has pointed out is that a gift of this is it offers a greater possibility for the expression of religious freedom. When government and society aren't as deeply intertwined with religion, there's more of an opportunity being made available to us to explore how God is calling us as an individual without having the government clamp down on the individual conscience. So while there are many things, of course, that many of us may regret about the rising tide of secularism, what Father Sosa is reminding us with these preferences is that there are also opportunities embedded in this as well. Opportunities to work with people as individuals, to help them understand how God is calling them in particular, and through the gift of the spiritual exercises, help these individuals grow in their relationship with God. All right, so the second preference, walking with the excluded. This has been described as a mission of reconciliation and justice. Meeting those who are on the margins of society, those who've been hurt. One question we probably all should be asking is, who are the excluded? And of course, the answer to that question will depend upon our context. Here in Philadelphia, the excluded may look like a very different group than it would look in Africa. What each of us is being called to do is to recognize the hurt that's in the world, to make people aware of a burning need for reconciliation, because all of us have been separated from one another and from God to one extent or another. And the society and our collaborators are being called to work together to help heal that rift, to bring people back into right relationship with each other. And one of the beautiful things about the Jesuit network of works is the variety of different things we do means that we have greater reach than many other institutions would, because Jesuit universities provide an opportunity, say, for reflection and research on the root causes of these kinds of rifts, whereas the direct social service agencies that the society sponsors can actually help bring about change and healing on the ground. By working together and recognizing that our missions are actually part of the same larger project, there's an opportunity for us to reflect and have an effect in a deeper and more profound way. The third preference, accompanying young people in the creation of a hope-filled future. I challenge you to try saying that 5 times fast. Some people are referring to this one as journeying with youth. You can definitely tell the marketing folks had their impact on that. It's a lot easier to say that one. And for Jesuits, this one looks as if it may be sort of the low-hanging fruit. From our founding document in 1540, one of the things that the Formula Institute called for us to do was to engage in the education of children and unlettered persons. And within 8 years, we had started our first school at Messina, and ever since then, the Jesuits have never looked back in terms of education. And so many of our works are deeply tied to working with young people. And one of the things to help us remember at this moment in time is that education needs to be more than just giving people skills. Certainly in higher ed today, there can sometimes be an understanding that people are just here in order to prepare themselves to get jobs. And that's certainly important. But what education in the Jesuit model is really about is about forming the whole person, about helping them grow into who they've been created to be, by caring for the entirety of who they are, giving them a well-rounded education that will allow them to dream of a bigger future, to build a better world. 1/3 of the people on planet Earth right now are under the age of 20. The world that they are going to build and that they are going to inherit is going to be different from the world that came before. We're being called by this to use the gift of the spiritual exercises to help them understand what their own gifts are, to dream of a better future. And the fourth and final of our preferences is caring for our common home. Effectively, to care about the environment. Now, this is part of a larger movement within the Church. The Pope's encyclical a few years back, Laudato Si, was calling upon all people of goodwill to reflect on the goodness of creation, to bring about a conversion of our hearts for a way of living on this earth that is working in harmony with it, that understands that the creation was a gift to all of humanity, that we're intended to be stewards of it, to pass on to the next generation. It's not something that was given to us for each of us to make as much use of in our lifetime as possible, leaving nothing for those who come behind. Creation is intended to lead us towards God. And one of the interesting things about this is I think it really does highlight how these universal apostolic preferences interweave and interact with each other. Because it's undeniable that our climate is changing, that the world's resources are being used. I mean, it's 67 degrees right now in February in Philadelphia. That is not a sign of the way the environment has been. Here in Philadelphia, we can cope with that. But many of the most marginalized in the world are the ones who are most hurt by the changes in the environment. The young people who are living today are the ones who are going to have to deal with the environmental degradation throughout their lifetime. Dealing with any one of these preferences implicates dealing with the rest. All right, so that's a little bit of theory and background on each of these universal apostolic preferences. Thought it might be useful for us to be able to just sort of spotlight how they're being lived out in different Jesuit apostolates around the world, to make it a little more concrete. So, showing the way to God. Now, certainly spirituality has been an important apostolate for Jesuits for many years. But for a long time, the ministry of the spiritual exercises was understood as something that our retreat houses did, and it perhaps didn't have as much of a direct effect on our educational institutions, for example. Now, that's somewhat changing. The Office of Ignatian Spirituality now offers Ignatian spirituality programs outside of given spots to people in parishes all over the country. Ignatian spirituality informs what we do here in campus ministry with our retreat programs. But I wanted to highlight one particular program that's been going on, which I found particularly interesting. And I thought I'd start with an easy one, starting at a university here in the United States. At Santa Clara University out in California, they have what's known as the Miller Center for Entrepreneurship. Now, this works in Silicon Valley to help those who are on the margins try to move into more mainstream American society through entrepreneurial work, starting their own businesses, trying to build up their own communities. Now, they call it social entrepreneurship because the point isn't just to help people get money, but to have them develop their businesses in such a way that it develops their wider community. And one of the interesting things about this particular program is that those who run it have been reflecting deeply and have been informed by the spiritual exercises. They look at the model of how a spiritual director would work with his or her directee to inform how they and their mentors work with those they're mentoring. Have a relationship of openness, of reflection, of guidance, of listening to the Spirit, and helping the entrepreneurs notice what needs to be noticed in their communities. It's a very unusual application of the spiritual exercises, but it's also a creative one. And these kinds of creative applications, I think, are what we're being called to dream of through the UAPs. Moving to the other side of the world, walking with the excluded, we have Jesuit Refugee Service. Now, the Jesuit Refugee Service was originally founded after the Vietnam War with the humanitarian crisis of what were known as the Vietnam boat people. It was intended to be a temporary response to these displaced persons by the Society of Jesus, and 40 years later, the Jesuit Refugee Service is still going. Now, it serves over 1 million people worldwide, but I want to focus specifically on the Asia-Pacific region, where it's serving 30,000 people in Australia, Thailand, the Philippines, Cambodia, and Indonesia. Now, I have to admit, when I think of refugees, the first thing that comes to mind usually is sort of the refugee camps. The poor people who are in these displaced locations with really nothing on their backs. And there are certainly services that organize those camps and do excellent work there, but the Jesuit Refugee Service doesn't, for the most part, make that the focus of its work. Its work is focused on accompanying, serving, and advocating. And there are 4 main ways through which they do that. For example, they focus on education, offering educational opportunities, say for people in refugee camps or urban refugees who've arrived in a city, to give them the skills they need to learn how to live in the new society where they find themselves. Similarly, they'll focus on livelihoods, giving them technical and competence to find a way to get a job or a trade so that they'll be able to support themselves. There's also going to be reconciliation, which is perhaps the most important of the things they do. Looking at the situation that has given rise to the displacement of persons either internally or internationally, and trying to bring about a reconciliation of hearts and minds to heal the situation. And finally, they have advocacy, which allows them to extend their reach beyond helping individuals who are in front of them to try and convince governments and others to provide the services that people need. And so, for example, right now, the photo that I put up there is of a refugee camp in Myanmar. JRS doesn't actually operate in Myanmar, not directly, not serving people on the ground, but it does have a concentrated advocacy program going on right now to try and find ways for the people from that country and those who are settled in the surrounding countries to find a way to get the governments to treat them with dignity and to try and heal the underlying problems that have led to the refugee problems there. All right, so staying in the Asia-Pacific region, we're looking at journeying with youth. I just wanted to spotlight a Jesuit university in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, the Sanata Dharma University. If you're interested, Sanata Dharma is a term that means something like the natural, ancient, and eternal way. It's a Jesuit university that's only a few decades old, but it's operating in a very different environment than St. Joe's is here. Now, American society, we think of as being very multicultural, very pluralistic, but yet it does have a history of being a primarily Christian society. And that gives us a context in which we work. The context in Indonesia, while also very multicultural, very pluralistic, is historically the largest Muslim country in the world. And so being a Catholic university in a situation like that gives rise to different issues, different questions than the ones we have here. And one of the ministries that university likes to highlight is the retreat program they offer for the multicultural, multi-religious students who come into their university and ask them to face the question, have you ever actually interacted with someone from another religious tradition before? And they describe it as, at the start, being very awkward for the students. Because for many of them, actually they've lived most of their lives within their own particular community and have been taught more or less to try and avoid those from other religious backgrounds. But through the ministry of the university, they come to understand the things they have in common and the things they have to learn from each other. As you can sort of see from the smiles on their faces, it's a pretty successful program. I wish I could get that many people to show up for our programs. But one of the interesting things is, of course, the university is also collaborating with the local Jesuit parish there in Yogyakarta, where during Ramadan, there's at least a certain circle of people who find that actually we want to go over to the Catholic parish for our iftar, for the meal that we're going to have at the end of the day to break our fast, where the Catholic community is reaching out to the Muslim community to provide a place of welcome and conversation where they can understand that we can build bridges, that we're all part of a larger community. This is what's being taught to the young people at their university as a way of encountering the world of the 21st century, where people are going to encounter more and more people from different backgrounds, whether it's here in the United States or elsewhere. All right. Leaping to the other end of the Eurasian continent, I just wanted to spotlight the Magis Europe program. Now, this is a program that's been running for about a decade. The heart of what they do is each summer, for about a week, they host young people from all over Europe for a week of prayer and service and reflection and encounter. It's an opportunity for them to, again, encounter people from different cultural, ethnic backgrounds, but also a chance in a continent that is secularizing very quickly to realize that their Catholic background offers them something of value that wider society may not be telling them is something to be valued and cherished and honored. And so they have the experience to come together, to pray together, to work together, and to learn from each other. And one of the things I like about this particular picture that's here is that it points out just how interrelated the Jesuit network around the world really can be. I don't know if you can see on the picture, but a couple of the people in that picture are wearing red t-shirts that say Jesuits on them, including right there. That guy is a guy named Balint Nagy, a Jesuit I spent a summer program with a couple of years back. He's from Hungary. And I suspect that when we were both in California is when he got these t-shirts, because those t-shirts are produced by Homeboy Ministries. Homeboy Industries. Father Greg Boyle's work down in Los Angeles, working with young gang members, trying to get them off the street, get them skills, get them to reclaim their lives that were taken from them in many ways. And these t-shirts, which were produced by young people in LA, are now being worn in a program for young people in Europe. The Jesuit world is not that big. there's very concrete ways in which we're all interrelated. And part of the reason I wanted to point that out is because we can do so much more together than we can in our own individual apostolates on their own. All right. And finally, caring for our common home. For this UAP, I wanted to focus a little bit on what's going on in Africa. Now, the Cassisi Agricultural Training Center is a place in Zambia. One of the things it does, it helps rural villagers move from subsistence farming to entrepreneurship. Because these are people who have found that their entire lives, due to the systems in which they were raised, largely due to colonialism, taught them that all they could do was grow enough to feed themselves. It's trying to give them a mindset of, if you are going to be able to treat your crops and your village in a different way, you're going to be able to connect yourself with the local city, sell your crops to the city, become your own boss, become someone who can take control of your own destiny. And one of the things that they're trying to do there is restore some of the local indigenous knowledge that was lost through colonialism. Policies that were put in place by the European governments to help people say, oh, well, you can make more for us if you're a subsistence farmer and if we organize our government in this particular way, which was great for extracting resources out of Zambia, not necessarily so great for the Zambians themselves, nor for the environment in Zambia. And so the idea is to work with these people who are marginalized, again, connecting these different apostolic preferences, to help them organize their farms in a way that's more sustainable, in a way that's going to allow them to support their families for generations to come, to integrate them into wider society by moving beyond their local village to connecting with the local city. Will it be a hope? Will this be effective? I cannot say for certain, but the idea is to try and find ways to experiment, to try and build things up. Elsewhere in Africa, we have, I'm going to do this in English, sorry folks, the Loyola Social Centers in Lomé, the capital of Togo. What they're doing there, journeying with youth, but also trying to form them with these children with what they call an ecological Christmas. Taking the young children with whom this local social center works and trying to teach them sound ecological practices from a very young age. The idea is that they're going to try and teach these children ways that they can care for their country, care for their home, in a way that will give them a future. Because again, all of these preferences overlap with each other. The people who are most hurt by the environmental degradation often are the young and the marginalized. And so by working with them to try and find ways for them to build their futures, we're caring for them and caring for Mother Earth as a whole. All right, so that's a little bit on these various apostolic preferences, sort of their concept in general, how they're being lived out around the world. I'd like to spend our last few minutes together just thinking about what did these mean for us. We're here at St. Joseph's University. This is the particular Jesuit apostolate where all of us who are here in this room work or study. How can we put them into action in our own lives, in our own work? For example, how can we put the spiritual exercises into effect in carrying out our mission here? What does discernment have to offer us? Are there ways that we can use Ignatian spirituality to reflect on the challenges that face this university moving forward? In terms of dealing with the marginalized. As we become more of an urban campus with this upcoming merger, what new populations will we encounter? Will we be confronted in new ways that we haven't been before? Because here on Hawk Hill, we're located on the boundary between the urban and the suburban. But with the merger with the University of the Sciences, we are going to be very much an urban campus, confronted by people with needs that weren't staring us in the face when we're located just here. In terms of journeying with youth, are we actually providing space for our students to dream of a better future? Or are we just trying to get them skills to get a new job? Are we going to provide them with opportunities to grow while they're here? And what can we do to do that more? And finally, what are we going to do to hand on the gift of this creation to the next generation? Creation was given as a gift to all of humanity, not just to those who happen to be on the planet Earth at this particular moment in time. And we have a duty as stewards of God's creation to make sure that there's something here for that generation. What can we do at this university, either through our research, through our practices of caring for our students, through our immersion programs, through anything else that will allow us to preserve this earth for the next generation? This isn't a roadmap. I don't have the answers to these questions. All I have is the opportunity for each of us to spend time reflecting on these to see how they can inform the work that we do, to guide our institution and us as individuals, to draw us into a relationship with the network of Jesuit works around the world, to collaborate with them to do these more effectively than we could hope to do on our own. And so, as a final thought, I just have a quote from Father Sosa, the Superior General of the Jesuits. "The preferences give a horizon, a point of reference to the entire society of Jesus. They capture our imaginations and awaken our desires. They unite us in our mission." I thank you for your time this afternoon. If any of you have any questions, I'd be delighted to hear them. Thank you. So the question is, how do we at St. Joseph's balance the local and the worldwide implications of these preferences? Do we always need to be thinking of the worldwide implications, or can we just think of them locally? And the answer, of course, as with so many things in the Catholic world, is both and. We should be applying these preferences in our work here in Philadelphia, absolutely. The first and foremost thing is, how are we going to do things in our particular apostolate, in our particular work, that can respond to these preferences? But always in the back of our minds, we should be asking the question, what are the global implications of what we're doing? What are the opportunities that would permit us to cooperate with other Jesuit works around the world to have a greater impact? What can we do with other works that will allow us to do things that we could never do on our own? Again, not a roadmap, it's just a way of thinking that I think very often gets lost. It's very easy for us to know that we're here at St. Joe's. One of the things that we're being challenged to do here is to think of ourselves more broadly. Over 2 million students study at Jesuit colleges, universities, and schools around the world. If we have the ability to collaborate with each other, we can have an impact through them that we could never have as just an individual school. And so that kind of thinking is what we're being called to do. Any other questions? Tom. I can hear you just fine, thank you. So for those who are not here in person, the question was, in the context of our merger with the University of the Sciences, which is a secular institution, how do we bring these universal apostolic preferences into the context of our work as we merge with that? And I think the important thing for us to do would be to introduce the Jesuit mission in a way that can look attractive to them, to find a part of what it is we do that they can hook onto. For example, I think that care for our common home resonates with a lot of people in American society these days. And so it could give us a door in for a way to have a conversation with them and hopefully expand their understanding of environmental issues to help them see that there are spiritual aspects to that, not just the important, not to be denied, importantly, economic and social and scientific aspects. And so use points of commonality as a departure point to share the particular Jesuit spin on these things. Is that helpful? And I would agree that the question of race really is one that is usefully critiqued by each of these preferences. That it's a central issue and often is a perfect way of demonstrating the intersection among our concerns here. That the question of race in the United States, as we all know, is a complicated, deep historical one. The particular instantiation of it here at this particular institution is a deep, particular story, and there are no easy answers on that. But I think it would be useful to use these as a lens, as a way of starting to think about where we go from here and how do we understand how we got here. Sure, why not? Not quite sure how to respond to that, other than to say I think it is an important point worth pondering. Thank you. Anyone else today? Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks again to Doug, Father Ray, and his presentation. My introduction, I forgot to mention that Father Ray had practiced law for some years before he entered the Society of Jesus, and I think today you made the case for the apostolic preferences in a very thoughtful way, and giving us an entry into how we should be able to think about them more broadly and integrate them into our own lives here. So thank you for your contribution to Mission Week. And God bless everybody. Thank you for all of you who have been joining us through the live stream as well. Take care.